Welcome, mystery lovers. In this story, we step into the world of Tommy and Tuppence, a pair whose wit and courage have made them unforgettable. Tell us where in the world you're listening from. It's always a joy to see how far these mysteries travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep new cases coming. Now then, shall we begin? Tommy Beresford liked to think of himself as a man of modern habits. He read articles about efficiency, occasionally rearranged drawers in a burst of domestic enthusiasm, and had once attempted to time his morning shaving routine with a kitchen timer. All these efforts were met with varying degrees of derision from Tuppence, but this morning, this ill-fated, tea-scented morning, he was determined to impress her. The kitchen of their South Kensington flat was a modest affair. Honey-coloured cabinets, a slightly temperamental kettle, and a cheerful clutter that bore the unmistakable fingerprints of Tuppence's personality. Tommy stood at the counter with an expression of intense concentration, as though preparing to defuse a bomb rather than stack crockery. "Observe," he announced, sliding plates into a neat interlocking arrangement. "The Beresford method. Economical, graceful, structurally sound, practically architectural." From behind him came Tuppence's voice, warm and too amused for comfort. "Darling, if I remember correctly, your last architectural endeavour resulted in the great collapse of 47, 3 saucers, 1 sugar bowl, and a dent in the linoleum." "That was different," Tommy said, straightening. "That was before I refined the technique." He reached for her favourite teacup, white porcelain with tiny blue flowers, delicate enough to require gentle handling. He held it aloft, turning to face her triumphantly. "You see," he continued, "the secret is—" A soft crack interrupted him. Tuppence's eyebrows lifted. "Oh?" Tommy froze, staring in horror at the fine fracture line now zigzagging across the cup's surface like an accusing finger. It must have been pre-existing damage," he offered weakly. "Of course," Tuppence said, stepping forward and inspecting her wounded piece of china. "It simply leapt into a crack out of sheer excitement from your demonstration." "Very fragile material. Porcelain," he muttered. Terribly fragile, especially when handled by men attempting structural efficiency." Tommy sighed. "You're going to hold this over my head for years, aren't you?" "Oh, decades," she replied cheerfully. "Possibly generations. Our great-nieces will hear of the day Tommy betrayed the teacup." Before he could respond, a faint sound, the barest whisper of paper sliding over wood, caught Tuppence's attention. She glanced toward the kitchen door. "What was that?" she asked. "Probably the postman," Tommy said, "or the milk bill escaping in despair." Tuppence crouched slightly and peered at the floor. "No, look." She reached under the bottom edge of the door and drew out a small envelope, pale grey, unmarked, its paper slightly rough to the touch. It seemed out of place in their cheerful kitchen, like a misplaced item from a stranger's briefcase. "It's been pushed through just now," she murmured. "I didn't hear the bell." Tommy frowned. "Strange. The post comes later, and nobody knocks without our hearing." Tuppence held the envelope delicately, studying it with an expression that mixed curiosity with something quieter beneath. A quick, instinctive alertness Tommy knew well from their earlier escapades. The handwriting on the front was spidery, uneven, almost shy. "Tuppence," written in thin, stiff strokes. "Well," she said lightly, "either I've been invited to join a clandestine society, or someone wants to sell me very exclusive wallpaper." "Tuppence, be careful. It could be—" she replied, already sliding a fingernail beneath the flap. Inside was a single slip of paper. She unfolded it, eyes flicking rapidly across the single line written in bold block letters, "Come alone and tell no one." Tommy stared. "It is a clandestine society." "Hardly," she said. "Clandestine societies don't usually send notes made from recycled office stationery." He sniffed. There was indeed a faint chemical tang, sharp, metallic, reminiscent of old carbon duplicators from wartime offices. "What's that smell?" "Carbon copy ink," she replied. "Very old-fashioned, very intentional." Her voice softened in a way Tommy couldn't quite read. "Well?" he asked. "What does it mean? Who's it from?" "No idea." She folded the slip again and placed it back into the envelope, almost absently. "It's probably a silly joke. Albert might be behind it. He's always trying to startle us into another adventure. But why the secrecy? Come alone and tell no one. That's rather ominous. Yes, she said, deliciously ominous. She pocketed the envelope with a smile that was just a shade too bright. I'll ring Albert and ask if he thinks he's being funny. Tommy nodded. Good. Best to clear it up. Tuppence didn't move toward the telephone. Instead, she picked up her handbag, paused, then set it down again, replacing it with her lighter coat. Her eyes drifted to the cracked teacup still in Tommy's hand. Do try not to break anything else while I'm out, she said. Out? Where are you going? To buy kippers. You've eaten the last of them again. But, Tommy gestured toward the hall, ring Albert first. I will, darling, she said, already halfway to the door. Perhaps while I'm queuing for fish. Shouldn't you take your handbag? He called. But she had already slipped out, closing the door with a firm click behind her. Tommy looked down at the wounded teacup, then at the door. He hesitated only a moment before shaking his head. She'll be back in 10 minutes, he muttered. Kippers don't buy themselves. Yet something faintly unsettled him, not the note itself, which seemed melodramatic at best, but the quiet way she had pocketed it, the unreadable flicker in her eyes. He tried to brush it off. Tuppence adored intrigue. She collected it like some women collected cats. A mysterious letter slipped under the door was practically an invitation to breakfast for her. Still, he turned the envelope over again in his mind. Pale grey, faint chemical smell, stiff handwriting. It reminded him of old war offices, dim corridors, dusty filing cabinets, memories he knew Tuppence hadn't forgotten. He set the cracked teacup on the counter, intending to repair it with glue later. Perhaps, possibly, if he found the right glue. By the time the kettle had boiled and he had prepared himself a solitary cup of tea in a sturdier mug, he realized she had been gone longer than he expected. Long enough to buy kippers, perhaps, but she usually shouted a farewell through the door, or left a remark about his condition of domestic exile following any crockery mishap. Tommy wandered to the window and peered down at the street. No sign of her. Only a milk cart rattling by, a woman cycling toward the main road, a man in a brown coat reading a newspaper by the lamp-post. He returned to the kitchen, eyes drawn involuntarily to the door where the envelope had been found. Something about it gnawed at him. The smell, the rushed lettering, the strange insistence on secrecy. Perhaps he should have insisted she stay, or accompanied her. But Tuppence Beresford was not someone one insisted upon. Buy kippers, he repeated aloud, and then ring Albert. But Tuppence had done neither, and Tommy, though he did not yet know it, had just watched the first thread of their safe, ordinary day unravel into something darker, something that would pull them both far from cracked teacups and mundane errands, something that had already begun. Cy occasionally rearranged drawers in a burst of domestic enthusiasm, and had once attempted to time his morning shaving routine with a kitchen timer. All these efforts were met with varying degrees of derision from Tuppence, but this morning, this ill-fated, tea-scented morning, he was determined to impress her. The kitchen of their South Kensington flat was a modest affair, honey-coloured cabinets, a slightly temperamental kettle, and a cheerful clutter that bore the unmistakable fingerprints of Tuppence's personality. Tommy stood at the counter with an expression of intense concentration, as though preparing to defuse a bomb rather than stack crockery. "Observe," he announced, sliding plates into a neat interlocking arrangement. "The Beresford method, economical, graceful, structurally sound, practically architectural." From behind him came Tuppence's voice, warm and too amused for comfort. "Darling, if I remember correctly, your last architectural endeavour resulted in the great collapse of 47, 3 saucers, 1 sugar bowl, and a dent in the linoleum." "That was different," Tommy said, straightening. "That was before I refined the technique." He reached for her favourite teacup, white porcelain with tiny blue flowers, delicate enough to require gentle handling. He held it aloft, turning to face her triumphantly. "You see," he continued, "the secret is—" A soft crack interrupted him. Tuppence's eyebrows lifted. "Oh?" Tommy froze, staring in horror at the fine fracture line now zigzagging across the cup's surface like an accusing finger. It must have been pre-existing damage," he offered weakly. "Of course," Tuppence said, stepping forward and inspecting her wounded piece of china. It simply leapt into a crack out of sheer excitement from your demonstration. Very fragile material. Porcelain, he muttered. Terribly fragile, especially when handled by men attempting structural efficiency. Tommy sighed. You're going to hold this over my head for years, aren't you? Oh, decades, she replied cheerfully. Possibly generations. Our great-nieces will hear of the day Tommy betrayed the teacup. Before he could respond, a faint sound, the barest whisper of paper sliding over wood, caught Tuppence's attention. She glanced toward the kitchen door. What was that? She asked. Probably the postman, Tommy said, or the milk bill escaping in despair. Tuppence crouched slightly and peered at the floor. No, look. She reached under the bottom edge of the door and drew out a small envelope, pale grey, unmarked, its paper slightly rough to the touch. It seemed out of place in their cheerful kitchen, like a misplaced item from a stranger's briefcase. It's been pushed through just now, she murmured. I didn't hear the bell. Tommy frowned. Strange. The post comes later, and nobody knocks without our hearing. Tuppence held the envelope delicately, studying it with an expression that mixed curiosity with something quieter beneath, a quick, instinctive alertness Tommy knew well from their earlier escapades. The handwriting on the front was spidery, uneven, almost shy. Tuppence, written in thin, stiff strokes. Well, she said lightly, either I've been invited to join a clandestine society, or someone wants to sell me very exclusive wallpaper. Tuppence, be careful. It could be. She replied, already sliding a fingernail beneath the flap. Inside was a single slip of paper. She unfolded it, eyes flicking rapidly across the single line written in bold block letters. Come alone, and tell no one. Tommy stared. It is a clandestine society. Hardly, she said. Clandestine societies don't usually send notes made from recycled office stationery. He sniffed. There was indeed a faint chemical tang, sharp, metallic, reminiscent of old carbon duplicators from wartime offices. What's that smell? Carbon copy ink, she replied. Very old-fashioned, very intentional. Her voice softened in a way Tommy couldn't quite read. Well, he asked. What does it mean? Who's it from? No idea. She folded the slip again and placed it back into the envelope, almost absently. It's probably a silly joke. Albert might be behind it. He's always trying to startle us into another adventure. But why the secrecy? Come alone and tell no one. That's rather ominous. Yes, she said, deliciously ominous. She pocketed the envelope with a smile that was just a shade too bright. I'll ring Albert and ask if he thinks he's being funny. Tommy nodded. Good. Best to clear it up. Tuppence didn't move toward the telephone. Instead, she picked up her handbag, paused, then set it down again, replacing it with her lighter coat. Her eyes drifted to the cracked teacup still in Tommy's hand. Do try not to break anything else while I'm out, she said. Out? Where are you going? To buy kippers. You've eaten the last of them again. But, Tommy gestured toward the hall. Ring Albert first. I will, darling, she said, already halfway to the door. Perhaps while I'm queuing for fish. Shouldn't you take your handbag? He called. But she had already slipped out, closing the door with a firm click behind her. Tommy looked down at the wounded teacup, then at the door. He hesitated only a moment before shaking his head. She'll be back in 10 minutes, he muttered. Kippers don't buy themselves. Yet something faintly unsettled him, not the note itself, which seemed melodramatic at best, but the quiet way she had pocketed it, the unreadable flicker in her eyes. He tried to brush it off. Tuppence adored intrigue. She collected it like some women collected cats. A mysterious letter slipped under the door was practically an invitation to breakfast for her. Still, he turned the envelope over again in his mind, pale grey, faint chemical smell, stiff handwriting. It reminded him of old war offices, dim corridors, dusty filing cabinets, memories he knew Tuppence hadn't forgotten. He set the cracked teacup on the counter, intending to repair it with glue later. Perhaps, possibly, if he found the right glue. By the time the kettle had boiled and he had prepared himself a solitary cup of tea in a sturdier mug, he realized she had been gone longer than he expected. Long enough to buy kippers? Perhaps, but she usually shouted a farewell through the door, or left a remark about his condition of domestic exile, following any crockery mishap. Tommy wandered to the window and peered down at the street. No sign of her. Only a milk cart rattling by, a woman cycling toward the main road, a man in a brown coat reading a newspaper by the lamppost. He returned to the kitchen, eyes drawn involuntarily to the door where the envelope had been found. Something about it gnawed at him. The smell, the rushed lettering, the strange insistence on secrecy. Perhaps he should have insisted she stay, or accompanied her. But Tuppence Beresford was not someone one insisted upon. "By Kippers," he repeated aloud, and then ring Albert. But Tuppence had done neither, and Tommy, though he did not yet know it, had just watched the first thread of their safe, ordinary day unravel into something darker, something that would pull them both far from cracked teacups and mundane errands, something that had already begun. Tommy Beresford believed in breakfast. Not in the philosophical or sentimental sense, but in the practical certainty that the world improved once one had toast and tea. Tuppence, who was often more enthusiastic about adventures than meals, had nevertheless never failed to be home by breakfast time, unless she had already warned him with a note, a shout, or some other flourished declaration. This morning, however, there was nothing. No cheerful, "Tommy, I'm starving," or commentary on her latest encounter with odd village personalities. There was instead only the quiet creak of the kitchen floorboards and the faint hum from outside as London began its day. Tommy, buttering toast with the precision of a man trying to distract himself, muttered, "Kippers do not take 12 hours to purchase." He set the knife aside and glanced at the clock. Nearly 8. Tuppence had left the previous evening, coat on, smile bright, leaving him with a cracked teacup and assurances she'd ring Albert. But she hadn't rung Albert, and she hadn't rung him. He forced down a sip of tea, making himself imagine she'd stayed with a friend, or been delayed by some curious spectacle, an amateur magician, a protest march, a cat stranded on a rooftop. Tuppence had a knack for falling into small dramas, but still, her absence scraped at him. He had reached for the second slice of toast when the telephone shrilled sharply. Tommy darted toward it with a relieved, "There she is, finally." He lifted the receiver. "Tuppence, honestly, you've had me." No voice answered. Instead, he was met by a soft, almost deliberate silence, like someone breathing very faintly, trying not to be heard. "Hello," he said, straightening. "This is Tommy Beresford. Who is this? If this is a childish joke—" A faint click cut him off. Deadline. Tommy stared at the receiver, unsettled. He lowered it slowly, as though expecting it to ring again with an immediate explanation. It didn't. "Well, that's not funny," he said aloud. He dialed Albert. Albert answered on the third ring. "Beresford residence. Oh no, wrong habit. Hello?" "Albert, did Tuppence ring you last night?" "No, sir. Haven't heard from her since Tuesday when she borrowed my bicycle pump." Tommy exhaled sharply. "Right. Well, if she calls you, tell her to ring me at once." He phoned Mrs. Sprott next. No, she hadn't seen Tuppence, nor had Mr. Davis down the hall, nor the neighbour from the flat above who always heard everything. Tommy began pacing. He stopped abruptly when his gaze fell on the hallway. Her handbag hung on its usual hook. He approached it slowly as though afraid it would vanish the moment he focused on it. Tuppence never went anywhere without her handbag, not even to fetch Kippers. She claimed it held the essentials for confronting life's surprises, which ranged from lipstick to an emergency pencil stub to a miniature folding map of London. Tommy frowned. Why would she leave this? He decided to retrace her steps. It was better than standing still, better than imagining things. The corner shop was his first stop. Mr. Barnes, the stout proprietor, was sweeping the entrance when Tommy arrived. "Morning, Mr. Beresford," Barnes said. "Need more marmalade?" "Not today. I'm actually looking for my wife. Did she come by last night?" "Mrs. Beresford?" "Yes, she passed here. Didn't come in, though. Looked like she was in a hurry, headed that way." Barnes pointed down the street toward the underground station. Tommy blinked. "Not toward the fishmonger?" "No, definitely the station. I remember thinking she looked rather preoccupied." Preoccupied. Not quite the word Tommy wanted to hear. At the next corner, a newsboy called out, "Late edition, early edition, all editions." Tommy approached. "You saw my wife last night? Light coat, brisk step." The boy snapped his fingers. "Oh, yes. Asked if I had the early edition, then said she'd come back, but she didn't buy anything. Did she seem upset? Hard to tell, sir. She looked thoughtful, like she was reading something in her mind. Tommy thanked him, though the words chilled him further. Outside the underground station, a cabbie waved Tommy over with the eager expression of a man who had decided he had relevant information. "You looking for a lady with auburn hair?" he asked. Tommy's heart lifted and sank simultaneously. "Possibly. Did you see her?" "Got in a black taxi, she did. Told me she looked right stressed." "What taxi? Which company?" The cabbie shrugged. "Can't say. It was dark. But she was definitely your lady." Tommy stared. "Are you absolutely sure?" "Well," the man scratched his chin. "Maybe it wasn't her. Hard to say. Could have been another lady with similar hair. A bit taller, maybe." Tommy left him with a tight, controlled politeness, masking frustration. A red herring, then, or a poorly remembered detail, or an intentional lie. He stepped back into the bustle of the station. The ticket clerk on duty confirmed he'd seen Tuppence descend the escalator with a well-dressed gentleman in a tweed coat. But a cleaner swore Tuppence had boarded the opposite train alone. Conflicting accounts. Deliberate confusion? Coincidence? Tommy's mind whirled. He turned toward home, each step heavier. He needed clarity, not contradictions. The flat greeted him with its familiar stillness. He hung his coat and walked toward the sitting room. Something felt wrong. He didn't know what at first, only that the room felt subtly disturbed, as though someone had exhaled gloom into the corners. His eyes swept over the furniture, the armchair, the small stack of books, the resting embroidery Tuppence swore she'd finish some day. And then he noticed the ashtray beside her favourite chair. A cigarette stubged, half-burned, crushed with careless force. Tuppence never smoked that brand. She disliked the smell, harsh, acrid, almost metallic. This one had a foreign scent, something heavy lingering in the air. Tommy picked it up with a handkerchief. Someone else had been here. He looked around again, slower this time, willing himself to see what he might have missed earlier. A chair slightly pulled back, a cushion angled differently, a faint disturbance in the thin film of dust on the side table where no one ever placed anything. Someone had entered this room, sat here, smoked here, perhaps waited for her, or followed her. Tommy drew a breath, feeling something shift inside him, something quiet, cold and resolute. "This isn't one of your harmless adventures, Tuppence," he murmured. "Something's wrong." He moved to the hallway, staring once more at the handbag she'd left behind. People didn't vanish into thin air. Not Tuppence, not his Tuppence. Her absence was no longer an inconvenience, it was a warning. Something, or someone, had diverted her from her path, and now Tommy would have to uncover who and why. Tommy Beresford had never liked the feeling of waiting. It was a timid, useless sort of sensation, and it suited neither his temperament nor his marriage. Still, as he sat across from Inspector Marriott in the small interview room at the station, he felt as though he had brought waiting with him like an unwanted companion. Marriott listened with brows drawn low while Tommy recounted Tuppence's disappearance, the odd silent telephone call, and the troubling cigarette stub in their sitting room. When Tommy finished, Marriott tapped a pencil against his notepad in slow, measured beats. "People wander off," Marriott said at last, and Tommy bristled. "Adults, I mean. They go visiting unexpectedly, get called away, forget to leave a message. Your wife is spirited, independent." "Yes," Tommy replied. "But she doesn't vanish mid-sentence, and she doesn't abandon her handbag, and she doesn't ignore an entire night without phoning anyone." Marriott's gaze sharpened. "You're certain she intended to return that evening?" "Absolutely." The inspector leaned back. "All right, Tommy, I hear you. I'll keep an eye open." The phrase was delivered with deliberate calm, but Tommy recognized Marriott's subtext. He was concerned. "I do need the note," Marriott added. Tommy blinked. "The note?" "You said an envelope was slipped under your door. Bring it in. I'd like to see the handwriting." "Yes, of course," Tommy said, with confidence he didn't feel. But 20 minutes later, when he let himself back into the flat, confidence turned to rising panic. He searched the kitchen table, the sideboard, the writing desk, the coat pockets, even the wastebasket. The envelope was nowhere. He checked every room twice, then 3 times before facing the truth. It was gone. Damn fool, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. You should have insisted she leave it behind. But regret was useless, so Tommy forced himself into action. There was no sense dwelling on lost paper when Tuppence herself was missing. He returned to the newsagent, who brightened the moment he saw him. Back again, Mr. Beresford? Yes, Tommy said. You mentioned my wife asked about the early edition. Did you see her speaking to anyone else? The boy chewed his lower lip, thinking. Well, yes, now that you say it. A funny-looking chap, grey face, tweed coat, whispered something to her, showed her a scrap of paper. She went stiff for a second, then hurried off. Grey face, tweed coat, a scrap of paper. Tommy felt his stomach tighten. Did you hear anything he said? He asked. No, sir. Only that she looked worried or determined. Hard to tell. Tommy thanked him and headed to the cafe down the street, where the scent of strong coffee and the clatter of dishes filled the narrow interior. A young waitress carried plates with casual expertise. Excuse me, Tommy said. I'm looking for my wife. She may have stopped in yesterday evening. The waitress frowned thoughtfully. Auburn hair? Quick smile? Yes, I remember. She asked me the quickest way to Chalk Farm. Tommy stared. Chalk Farm? Are you sure? Quite sure. I even drew her a little map on the back of her serviette, though she barely glanced at it. She seemed preoccupied. Tommy felt the ground shift slightly beneath him. Chalk Farm. They rarely went north. What possible reason could Tuppence have for going there? Outside, the world felt slightly tilted. He walked quickly toward the underground station, his mind leaping ahead. Grey-faced man, urgent words, Chalk Farm. Pieces scattered in every direction without forming a pattern. At the station entrance, Tommy approached the ticket clerk. Did you see my wife yesterday? Light coat, auburn hair. The clerk nodded. Yes, sir. She came down the escalator with a man. Tweed coat, middle-aged. I remember thinking they looked mismatched. With a man, Tommy repeated, pulse quickening. Yes, they went toward the northbound platform. Tommy thanked him and moved deeper into the station, descending the escalator to the platforms. The usual rattle of trains echoed, but today the sound felt hollow, distant. A platform porter was pushing a cart stacked with cleaning supplies. Tommy stopped him. I'm trying to trace my wife's movements. Did you see her yesterday evening? The porter scratched his cheek. Can't say I noticed her with any man, but I did see a lady matching that description board a train alone. Southbound, not northbound. Tommy blinked. Are you certain? As certain as a man can be when he's trying to move 20 mop buckets through rush hour. 2 witnesses. 2 conflicting accounts. Either Tuppence had split from the grey-faced man, or someone wanted to muddy the waters. Wait, the porter added. I think this might be hers. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a torn corner of paper, found it on the platform, looked like part of a note. Tommy took it carefully. The handwriting struck him like a physical blow. It was unmistakably Tuppence's. The fragment read only, Not follow me. Tommy stared at the slip, throat tightening. Was she warning him, being forced to mislead, or sending a message she hoped he alone would interpret correctly? He thanked the porter, though his voice was thin, and stepped onto the pavement outside the station. He needed air. He needed clarity. He needed Tuppence. Yet clarity refused to come. Instead, a prickling sensation climbed the back of his neck. Someone was watching him. He turned swiftly. At first he saw only street bustle, people moving with London's usual indifference. But then his gaze narrowed on a figure half concealed behind a lamppost across the street. The silhouette made no effort to blend naturally. It simply stilled, as though frozen in the act of spying. Tommy took one step forward. The figure ducked sharply, then vanished behind a row of newspaper stands. Tommy hurried across the street, heart pounding, and rounded the lamppost. But the pavement beyond was empty. No man in sight. No grey coat. No lingering shadow of direction. He scanned the street. No one ran. No one hid. Life carried on as though Tommy alone had slipped into a parallel moment of awareness. Frustration surged. He struck his palm lightly against the lamppost. "Who are you?" he muttered. "And what do you want with her?" A passing woman shot him a startled look before hurrying away. Tommy steadied himself. Rage wouldn't help. His mind worked best with logic, not panic. He forced himself to return home, each step echoing with the torn fragment, "Not follow me." By the time he reached the flat, Tommy had rehearsed half a dozen possible interpretations. None settled comfortably. Inside, the rooms appeared unchanged, but only at first glance. The faint smell of the harsh foreign cigarette lingered in the air, just enough to jolt him. Someone had been here, someone might return, and they had moved silently, purposefully. Tommy closed the door behind him, set the lock firmly, and let his hand rest against the wood. "Tuppence," he whispered, "what have you walked into?" No answer came, of course, but the flat felt as though it held its breath with him, waiting for Tommy to take the next step. And Tommy Beresford, who had never liked waiting, felt something in him harden into determination. Whatever path Tuppence had taken, whether willingly or under duress, he would follow it, even if she had begged him not to. Tommy Beresford had always considered Chalk Farm an area suspended between charm and neglect, too shabby to be fashionable, too dignified to fall entirely into disrepair. As he stepped from the bus that afternoon, he felt at once the quiet pulse of its side streets, rows of bow-fronted houses with peeling paint, narrow alleys lined with iron railings, and the lingering aroma of a late lunch drifting from upper windows. It was a neighbourhood that seemed to whisper to itself, and today those whispers felt like hints of secrets he had not yet learned to interpret. He consulted the small notepad where he had scribbled the address given by the cafe waitress. Tuppence had inquired about Chalk Farm. Why? What awaited her here? And who had led her north? Tommy walked briskly, his eyes roving over the details of the street. A discarded newspaper caught on a doorstep, a cat twitching its tail atop a garden wall, a milk bottle standing long forgotten. It was ordinary life, yet, threaded through it, an undercurrent of unease tugged at him. At the modest boarding house on the corner, the sign swayed faintly as he approached. He rang the bell. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a stout woman with hair pinned in determined spirals and an expression that suggested she had seen everything and approved of very little. "Yes?" she demanded. "Good afternoon," Tommy said with polite cheer. "I'm looking for someone who might have stayed here recently." "A woman?" "Plenty of women stay here," the landlady interrupted, "and half of them are trouble." Tommy attempted a smile. "This one wouldn't be. She's my wife." "Can't help you," the woman said briskly. "I don't shelter married women unless they're fleeing husbands. You don't look the type." "Thank you," Tommy replied, unsure whether to be flattered or offended. "Might I show you a photograph?" The landlady sighed, took the photo, glanced at it briefly and shook her head. "Not her. I did have a young woman last night. Nervous, sharp-tongued, didn't like the room, wanted to know if someone named Blakely lived nearby. I told her I didn't know every man in London." "Blakely?" Tommy repeated. "Yes. She asked several times like I was hiding him in the linen cupboard. Then she left in a hurry." Tommy's pulse quickened. "This woman, did she look anything like my wife?" "No," the landlady said firmly. "Different hair, different build. Hers was fair, talked fast. I'd recognize her voice anywhere. Sounded like she was ready to argue with a brick wall." Tommy thanked her and stepped back onto the street, his mind racing. Why would someone ask about a Blakely? Why would Tuppence suddenly direct herself toward an area connected to such a name? He reached a telephone box and rang Inspector Marriott. "Blakely?" Marriott repeated after Tommy had explained. "You're telling me someone asked for Blakely in Chalk Farm?" "Yes. Why?" Marriott exhaled. "That name is tied to a defunct wartime intelligence section. Very hush-hush at the time. Blakely was rumoured to have been involved in some questionable operations, never officially charged." "And Tuppence somehow stumbled into his orbit?" "Possibly. But don't jump to conclusions. These old names resurface like bad pennies. Keep looking. Call me if you find anything." Tommy left the booth and consulted his notes again. If Tuppence had asked about Chalk Farm, perhaps she had been searching for an address related to this Blakely. The idea unsettled him further. If the man was dangerous, she might have put herself in harm's way. He followed directions to a derelict office building that Marriott had mentioned. Once used by the old intelligence section, it now stood silent, its windows filmed with grime, its door hanging slightly crooked as though tired of resisting intruders. Tommy pushed gently, and it opened with a reluctant groan. Inside, dust coated the floor in a thick grey blanket. Light filtered through high windows in narrow beams, illuminating suspended motes that drifted lazily. The building smelled faintly of old paper, neglect, and something sharper, chemical, unpleasant, familiar. He walked carefully, his footsteps muffled. The silence was so profound that even his breathing felt intrusive. Near a broken desk, he spotted a cigarette stub crushed onto the floor. He crouched. The scent confirmed it, the same harsh, foreign-smelling brand he had found in his sitting room. Tommy's heartbeat quickened. Someone had been here recently. He scanned the ground. A paperclip glinted faintly. He lifted it and studied its distinctive V-shape. A habit of some sort, he murmured, or a signal. Further on, something else caught his eye. The faint impression of a woman's heel etched into the dust. The size and outline were painfully familiar. "Tuppence," he whispered. He touched the imprint lightly, as if it might tell him where she had gone. He straightened and continued deeper into the building. Scattered papers littered the floor, old memos brittle with age. He nudged open a door leading to what had once been a records room. More dust, more silence. Then, a sound. A soft scuff. Tommy froze. He listened. There it was again, a faint footstep in the corridor behind him. Tommy turned swiftly. "Who's there?" he called, his voice echoing too loudly in the empty building. No response. He moved toward the source of the sound, each step cautious. The corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit. At the far end, a side door stood slightly ajar, swinging almost imperceptibly as though disturbed moments earlier. Tommy hurried forward and pushed it open, stepping into the outside alley. It was empty, save for a scattering of leaves. He looked left, then right, and saw a flash of blue. A woman in a blue coat vanished around the corner of the street with the brisk, determined stride of someone late for work, or someone fleeing. "Tuppence!" Tommy shouted instinctively, though he knew at once it wasn't her. The stride was wrong, the hair was wrong, and something told him the figure was younger. He ran anyway, rounding the corner with haste. The woman stopped short, startled. "Good heavens!" she exclaimed. "Can I help you?" Tommy halted abruptly, breath catching. She was indeed an ordinary clerk, clutching a portfolio to her chest, eyes wide with confusion. I'm terribly sorry," Tommy said, catching his breath. "I mistook you for someone else." She frowned. "You shouldn't frighten people like that, you know. It's a wonder you weren't arrested." "No doubt," Tommy agreed wryly. She hurried off, muttering about men who behaved suspiciously during business hours. Tommy leaned against the wall for a moment, frustration simmering beneath his ribs. The pursuit had been for nothing, yet it reinforced the unsettling sense that he wasn't alone in searching these streets. Returning to the building, he paused near a rusted wastebin by the door. Something inside had been half burned, its edges curling. He carefully retrieved the charred sheet with his handkerchief. Most of the text was gone, but one line remained. Urgent. Retrieve the girl before he does. Tommy felt a coldness settle over him. Retrieve the girl. Before who does? Tuppence, another woman. Or was the mysterious girl the one the landlady had described? He stared at the burned page, then folded it carefully. There was no longer any doubt. Tuppence had stumbled upon something from the past, something dangerous, something still alive in the shadows of London, and he would not leave Chalk Farm without following every one of those shadows to its source. Inspector Marriott's summons arrived with the kind of blunt urgency that refused to be ignored. Tommy had only just returned to the flat after combing Chalk Farm for hours when the telephone trilled. He snatched it up before the first ring faded. "Beresford," Marriott's voice was clipped. "Come to St. Martin's Hospital, immediately." "Is it Tuppence?" Tommy asked, the question sharp enough to cut air. "No," Marriott said, "but someone who might help us find her." 10 minutes later, Tommy was pushing through the hospital's glass doors, the antiseptic smell clinging to the air like stern authority. Marriott waited just inside the corridor, arms folded, expression sober. "She's conscious now," he said. "But she's confused. Calls herself Jane Brown. Claims she was supposed to find you." "To find me?" Tommy echoed. "Why?" "You'll hear it from her directly. Come along." Marriott led him to a small wardroom. Inside, a young woman sat propped up against her pillows, looking pale but alert. She had fair hair in disarray and eyes that darted restlessly around the room, as though expecting to see shadows detach from the corners. When she saw them, she straightened. Are you the man who looks like a friendly bank clerk?" Tommy halted. I beg your pardon? Marriott gave a short cough that might have been amusement. Yes, that's him. Tommy adjusted his tie with dignity. I prefer approachable man of good breeding, but never mind that. Who are you? The young woman blew out a shaky breath. He told me to find you. Said it was important. Who told you? Tommy asked, stepping closer. I don't know his name. He didn't give one. He was grey-faced, wore a tweed coat, kept looking over his shoulder. Her fingers twitched nervously around the sheets. He pressed an envelope into my hand and said, Find the man who looks like a friendly bank clerk. Take this to him. Don't open it. Tommy and Marriott exchanged a glance. Tommy asked gently, And did you open it? Of course, she said, as though the answer ought to be obvious. The moment I was out of his sight. Marriott sighed. Naturally. But it was empty, she continued, not a thing in it, just blank paper. Where is it now? Tommy asked. Gone, she said helplessly, and someone must have taken it when I collapsed. Marriott stepped forward. Miss Brown, how did you come to collapse near Camden Market? Jane frowned. I don't know. I felt dizzy, light-headed. Then someone jostled me. I tried to get up, but everything went blurry. When I woke up, I was in the ambulance. Tommy nodded slowly. You said the man seemed frightened. Yes, Jane whispered. That's why I listened to him. His hands were shaking. He kept saying, They're watching, they're watching. She doesn't know she's the key. Tommy's breath caught. She? Did he say her name? Jane hesitated. No, just she, but he said it like you'd know who he meant. Tommy exchanged another glance with Marriott. The inspector's face had taken on a grim cast. This man, the grey-faced one, Tommy pressed. Did he mention where Tuppence was, or where he'd last seen her? Jane shook her head. He said he couldn't get close to her, that they would see him, that he was running out of time. Tommy leaned closer. Did he tell you why he chose you to pass the message? I was sitting near the market, she said quietly. Sketching. He must have thought I looked harmless, or maybe he just needed someone who'd listen. She paused, her voice trembling. He begged me, said someone would kill him if he didn't get the message through. Marriott rubbed his forehead. And yet the envelope was empty. Jane nodded. Empty. I swear it. Tommy's mind raced. The man had wanted to warn him, but an empty envelope suggested either a message removed or a plan to mislead them entirely. Yet Jane's sincerity was unmistakable. Fear clung to her like a second skin. Tommy noticed something then, a faint smear of blue on her coat sleeve. What's that? He asked, pointing. Jane looked down. That? Oh, I don't know. Wasn't there before he grabbed me. Must have brushed off from something he was carrying. Marriott leaned in, eyebrows raised. May I? He gently took the sleeve between gloved fingers. Looks like ink. Powdery. Industrial. Tommy's pulse quickened. Ink like from a duplicator? Marriott nodded slowly. We'll test it, but it matches the smell on that carbon copy letter you found. Jane swallowed. Is that bad? Bad enough to matter, Tommy replied. She looked at him with a mixture of hope and dread. Please, am I in danger? Tommy pulled a chair closer to her bed. Miss Brown, Jane, tell me truthfully. Do you feel someone is following you? Her face crumpled. Yes, I do. Ever since yesterday evening. People standing too close, strangers looking at me strangely. I know it sounds mad, but it doesn't, Tommy interrupted, his tone strengthening with calm reassurance. Tell us everything. When I left the market, Jane said, I felt watched. I couldn't walk 50 steps without someone glancing at me. I thought it was just nerves, but then a man across the street began matching my pace. When I turned, he ducked behind a lamppost. Tommy stiffened. What did he look like? I didn't see his face, she whispered. Only his outline, tall, dark coat. And he kept watching. Tommy and Marriott exchanged a glance of grim recognition. Tommy couldn't resist asking, did he look anything like a gentleman with poor instincts about lampposts? Jane looked confused. I'm sorry. Never mind, Tommy said. That silhouette sounds awfully familiar. Marriott straightened. We'll ensure you're protected, Miss Brown, but we need anything else, any detail at all that might help us find this man or understand why he involved you. Jane exhaled shakily. The only other thing he said was, she doesn't know she's the key. I don't know who he meant. I don't know what any of it means. But Tommy did, or at least he suspected. The she could only be Tuppence. The grey-faced man believed Tuppence was the key. Key to what? To whom? And why would he fear they would see him? Who were they? What power or threat lingered behind every message and every half-burned clue? He rose slowly from his chair, mind sharpening around a new resolve. This was no longer scattered fragments of coincidence. This was a coordinated pressure, closing in. Jane watched him anxiously. "Mr. Beresford, did I do the right thing?" "You did," Tommy said firmly. "You did exactly the right thing, and now we'll see to the rest." Marriott stepped aside to make a quick call for protective detail. Tommy moved to the window, peering through the narrow gap in the curtains. Outside, the late afternoon street bustled with its usual rhythm, but there, across the road, stood a solitary figure leaning against a lamppost, the same lamppost shadow from the station, tall, still, watching. A cold certainty settled in Tommy's chest. He turned back to Marriott. "He's here." Marriott snapped the telephone down and strode to the window. "Which one?" Tommy pointed. "Across the street. Dark coat, trying to look inconspicuous." Marriott peered out, jaw tightening. "I see him." Jane clutched the blanket. "Is that him, the man following me?" "Possibly," Tommy said, "or someone else interested in Tuppence." Marriott motioned for Tommy to stay down and hurried toward the corridor. Tommy remained at the window, watching as the silhouette shifted slightly, as though sensing the attention. Then the figure turned and walked away, not hurriedly, but with deliberate casualness. Tommy felt something within him settle into a new shape. No longer confusion, no longer scattered worry, determination. Because now it was clear. This was no isolated series of oddities, no mere slip of Tuppence's adventurous curiosity. This was a tightening net, and every person connected to her, even strangers plucked from the street, was being pulled into its threads. He turned back to Jane, offering a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't worry," he said gently. "Inspector Marriott will see you're safe." "But what about you?" Jane whispered. Tommy adjusted his coat, straightened his shoulders, and prepared to follow Marriott out. "For me," he said quietly, "this is only beginning," and the resolve in his voice made the room fall utterly still. The morning after his encounter at the hospital, Tommy Beresford found himself standing in the dim lobby of a building so aggressively bureaucratic that it seemed to repel individuality on sight. The Ministry Records Annex, a squat stone structure tucked behind Whitehall, had all the charm of a filing cabinet and twice as much dust. A faded sign above the reception desk read, "Authorized personnel only," though the receptionist had barely looked up when Tommy walked past with an air of earnest purpose. Marriott had supplied him with discreet assistance, or, more specifically, the name of a junior archivist currently taking extended leave. Tommy had borrowed the man's badge, his satchel, and, with considerable restraint, none of his lunch. Whether the archivist would one day return to find his reputation inexplicably elevated or ruined was not Tommy's concern for the moment. He entered the first records room, a long chamber lined with metal shelving that stretched toward a distant vanishing point. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their ceaseless buzz punctuating the silence like the drone of an anxious librarian. Files of every shade and thickness lined the shelves, buff folders for post-war logistics, blue ones for administrative minutiae, grey envelopes for cases better forgotten. Tommy moved steadily through the aisles, consulting the scribbled notes Marriott had given him. Blakely. Section P, Dormant Wartime Records, Restricted Access. The words, though few, held weight. Blakely had been presumed dead in 1944, yet whispers suggested otherwise. Marriott had spoken with distaste. A serpent in a garden we'd thought cleared, before directing Tommy toward the annex. He passed through the first chamber into a second, then a third, the air growing more musty with each step. Here, the shelves bore heavier locks. Some drawers had rust creeping from their hinges. Finally, Tommy reached a narrow corridor with a sign that read, "Archive Wing C. Historical clearance required." He swiped the borrowed badge at the brass panel. A green light blinked. The door clicked open. Inside, the air changed entirely. Gone was the mustiness. Here, a sterile coldness prevailed, like stepping into the shadow of an old secret. Everything felt ordered to the point of tyranny. Cabinets ranged in perfect grids. The floor gleamed with fresh polish. The lighting took on a pale, almost surgical quality. Tommy walked more slowly now. Instinct told him he had reached the heart of something important, something someone very much wanted locked away. He paused at a cabinet whose label had been partially peeled off. The remaining letters hinted at mischief. SEC-P Dorm. A faded tag swung loosely from the handle. Tommy took a quiet breath, then opened the drawer. Inside lay a careful arrangement of files, some in pristine condition, others worn soft from time. A few had red diagonal stamps reading inactive. Others bore discreet notations in tidy wartime hand. He sifted methodically, searching for Tuppence's name, searching for Blakely. Then he froze. There, in the centre, clipped to a folder of yellowing reports, was a recent photograph of Tuppence. His Tuppence. Cheerful expression, slightly tilted head, unmistakable spark in the eyes. Someone had taken this picture within the last week. Tommy lifted it with trembling fingers. Beneath it, typed in unmistakably modern script, was a header, Active Watch. Subject, Teresa Tuppence Beresford. Date, last updated, 7 days ago. His breath left him in a single quiet exhale. So this was not coincidence, not a mistaken trail. Someone connected to this dormant wartime section had been following Tuppence, watching her, recording her movements, and that meant they knew she had been asking questions, or perhaps they had lured her into asking them. He set the photo aside and reached deeper into the file. More documents, notes, wartime memos about Section P's operations, half redacted. A list of agent code names, operational concerns about infiltration, and then, clipped to the inside cover, a small handwritten note on pale grey paper. The handwriting was spidery, hesitant, the same as on the envelope slid beneath his door. If she remembers, everything collapses. Tommy stared at it, feeling as though invisible fingers were tightening around his throat. The same message, the same urgency, but now paired with an ominous implication. Tuppence held some memory capable of exposing what? Who? And why would that memory endanger her? He tucked the note carefully into his pocket. Marriott would have to see it. Turning his attention to the lower half of the drawer, he found a thicker folder labelled Blakely, Field Operations, Classified. The man's photograph, clipped to the front, showed a lean face with hollow eyes and a guarded expression. Beneath the photo, someone had scribbled a question mark in red pencil. Tommy flipped it open. Most of the contents were missing, removed, destroyed, borrowed, but one sheet lay at the bottom, a map of London, edges curled, worn from handling. A single location had been circled in black pencil, a derelict printing warehouse in Kilburn. Printing, carbon paper, ink, duplicators. The pieces began to align with chilling clarity. Tuppence's note, the blue dust on Jane's sleeve, the half-burned carbon copy letter. Someone was using old duplicating methods for reasons that made Tommy's skin tighten. He folded the map, slipped it into his coat, and closed the Blakely file. As he turned to leave, a shadow shifted across the end of the aisle. Tommy stiffened. A tall, severe-looking official stepped into view. His suit was immaculate, his jaw set at a level that suggested he rarely tolerated anything above or below that angle. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his tone clipped enough to slice paper. Tommy offered the archivist badge with an apologetic shrug. "I'm assisting Mr. Fairley, misfiled inventory records. Dreadful state of things in Wing C." "Indeed," the man replied, though suspicion clouded his gaze. "Which records were you retrieving?" "Section P," Tommy said lightly. "Old wartime debris. Most of it hardly worth keeping." The official's eyes hardened. Section P files are restricted, even for clearance-level assistance. "Oh dear," Tommy murmured. "I must have misunderstood the directive." "You must have," the man said, stepping closer. "Those documents are dormant for a reason." Tommy met his gaze with polite steadiness. "Yes, I noticed. Extraordinary amount of dust for something supposedly inactive." The man's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Irritation? Fear? Defensiveness? "You will leave Wing C immediately," he said sharply, "and you will not return here without explicit written authorization." "Perfectly reasonable," Tommy agreed. "I wouldn't dream of interfering with your archives." The official's eyes narrowed at the pause before the last word. Tommy replaced the file carefully, nodded once, and walked past him with the steady, unhurried stride of a man who hoped he still looked like he belonged. Only when he reached the main corridor did he allow himself to breathe fully. He turned toward the exit, but the corridor lights flickered suddenly. Once, twice. A brittle hum filled the air and the fluorescence dimmed for a heartbeat. When they brightened again, Tommy smelled it instantly. Cigarette smoke, harsh, metallic, foreign. Someone had been here moments ago. Someone who did not expect to be seen. On the floor near the wall, a small cigarette lay crushed, still warm enough to release a faint curl of smoke. Tommy crouched, studying it. The same brand found in his flat. The same brand crushed into the dust of the chalk farm building. Someone was following him through every thread of this inquiry, and they were close, too close. He scanned the corridor. It was empty, immaculately empty. Doors closed, silence absolute. But the smoke lingered like a taunt. At the exit, he paused, pressing a steadying hand against the cool metal of the door. He had come here seeking answers, but he had found something larger, older, more dangerous than he'd expected. Not merely a vanished wife or a frightened messenger, but a ghost from the war refusing to remain buried. Blakely. Section P. A memory they believed Tuppence possessed, one they feared enough to track her, abduct her, and shadow everyone she had touched. Tommy pushed open the door and stepped back into the outside air, the city's hum greeting him like a harsh but welcome friend. He glanced to his left. A man down the street lowered a newspaper just enough to reveal eyes fixed directly on Tommy. The Watcher. Again. Tommy's jaw set. This was no longer a search. It was a hunt, one in which both hunter and hunted had yet to reveal all their cards. And if Tuppence had truly stumbled into the remnants of a wartime secret, then Tommy would follow this trail into every archive, every shadow, every derelict building London possessed. Because he now understood the truth. The past hadn't finished with them, and it had come back with teeth. The address on the map led Tommy Beresford to Kilburn, just as night settled over the streets, not dramatically with thunder or fog, but in the quiet, unceremonious way London evenings often arrived, street lamps flickering to life one by one, shops pulling shutters down with weary metallic sighs, and the faint clatter of late commuters crossing roads with hunched shoulders. The warehouse stood on a side street behind an abandoned rail spur, its bricks dulled by soot and neglect. A missing pane in one window rattled faintly whenever a bus turned the corner. Tommy paused at the edge of the pavement, studying the building with narrowed eyes. The faint scent of old ink, metallic, chemical, seemed to drift toward him on an unfriendly breeze, and he knew before stepping inside that he was in the right place. He tested the front door. Locked. But along the left side, a smaller service door hung crookedly on its hinges, one screw missing entirely. He pushed it open, and it groaned in complaint. Inside, the atmosphere changed at once. The warehouse was a cavern of dimness and echo, its tall ceilings amplifying even the softest step. Papers, dozens of loose sheets, skittered across the floor in restless flickers whenever a draft threaded through the gaps in the walls. Metal shelving stood in rows, many empty, some sagging under the weight of old ledgers and broken crates. A faint humming drifted from somewhere deeper inside, like an old fan still clinging to life. It smelled of damp cardboard, rust, and unmistakably duplicating fluid. The same scent lingering on the first envelope Tuppence had received. A tightness gripped his chest. He moved deeper, careful to let his eyes adjust. His footsteps stirred dust into soft clouds, and the pale beams of streetlight through broken windows cast strange patterns across the floor. Then, in the center of the main floor, he saw signs of recent activity, not just movement, but haste. A wooden crate lay toppled onto its side. A second was split open along the edge, its slats broken and one splinter skewering upward like a jagged tooth. A length of rope hung loosely from a hook in the wall, its end frayed as though cut hurriedly. A folding chair was overturned, one of its legs snapped clean. Tommy stepped closer. Something caught on the broken edge of the crate glinted faintly, fragile and golden red. He knelt, a single strand of auburn hair. His breath left him. "Tuppence," he whispered. His hand trembled slightly as he plucked the hair free, rolling it between his fingers as though the warmth of her presence might still cling to it. She had been here, recently, and she had fought. Tommy rose, the weight of the discovery settling across his shoulders like a mantle. There was no longer any chance of comforting himself with thoughts of mistaken trails or harmless misadventures. Whoever had taken her, whoever thought she was the key, had moved her, restrained her, and then moved her again. He scanned the room sharply. A faint sound broke the silence, a footfall behind him. Tommy spun around. A stocky man, thick-necked and broad across the shoulders, stood half obscured by the shelving. His eyes widened when he realized he'd been spotted. "Stop!" Tommy called. The man bolted. Tommy ran after him, weaving between stacks of crates and rusty printing frames. The man darted toward the far stairwell, boots thudding on the metal steps. Tommy reached the base just as the man reached the top landing. "Who are you?" Tommy demanded. But instead of answering, the man stumbled backward as though afraid to come any closer. His lips parted, but only a strangled sound escaped. Then he turned and fled through a side door with surprising speed for his build, disappearing into the night beyond. Tommy reached the doorway but saw only darkness and the dim outline of distant chimneys. The man had vanished. "Damn," Tommy muttered. Had he been an accomplice, or another frightened pawn in a larger, more dangerous game? His eyes narrowed. The man's fear seemed genuine, almost panicked. But that didn't make him innocent. He returned to the warehouse floor. A stack of papers on a nearby table drew his attention. He approached and saw, resting beneath the sheets, a battered duplicator machine, its drum stained with ink, its handle worn. A partially inked stencil lay still attached, the letters crisp but incomplete. Tommy pulled it free. Even half-printed, the phrase stood out starkly. "Operation Again, Codex 7. He stared at it, uneasy. Again? What operation had Blakely attempted to resurrect? And why involve Tuppence? He rifled deeper in the stack of papers. A faded ledger lay beneath, its binding cracked. When he flipped open the cover, a list of payments, dates, and initials greeted him in smudged lines. Some names were legible, others were clearly aliases. One in particular made Tommy stiffen. Mary Ellison, a name Tuppence had once used in an undercover assignment during a wartime investigation. "Good Lord," he murmured, "they've been tracing her for years." He scanned further. More aliases, more coded payments. Whoever maintained these records had been busy. A flash of colour in the corner of the room caught his attention. A scarf, pale blue with embroidered flowers, looped over a rusted nail. Hope surged through him. It looked almost like something Tuppence might wear. He seized it. But the label stitched inside bore a name he recognized from Chalk Farm, the landlady of the boarding house, a red herring. Tommy exhaled sharply. Whoever had used this warehouse had gone to considerable trouble to create confusion, or perhaps they simply did not care what traces they left. He pocketed the ledger page with Tuppence's alias. Marriott would need to see it. As he moved toward the exit door, intending to search the upper level, a strange sound echoed faintly through the flooring. Tap, tap, tap. He froze. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm, not random. SOS. His heart lurched. Tuppence. He knelt and pressed his ear to the old pipes that ran along the wall. The tapping repeated, short, sharp, deliberate. He followed the pipes deeper into the building, skirting stacks of mouldering documents and abandoned machinery. Each tap grew louder, closer. The sound vibrated faintly beneath his palm when he touched the nearest pipe. He reached a locked metal door at the back of the warehouse. The tapping sounded louder here. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Tuppence, can you hear me?" Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. "Answer me!" Tommy shouted, pounding the door with his fist. No reply. He stepped back, fury and fear warring in him. Someone had been signalling, someone who wanted help, someone who knew Morse, someone who could have been Tuppence. Yet the silence that followed was final and chilling, as if the signaller had been abruptly pulled away, or gagged. He forced open the door with all his strength, but it gave way only to reveal an empty storage chamber. Dust coated the floor so thickly that any recent footprints would have stood out. There were none. The tapping had come through the pipes themselves, not the room. Frustration surged like a flame in his chest. They were moving her, constantly. He was always just one step behind. He stormed back toward the main floor, caught between the desire to demolish every crate in his path and the iron need to stay strategic. Someone was driving him in circles, and someone was watching. He reached the warehouse's service door and paused. The night air outside felt heavier, taut with invisible presence. Tommy stepped out into the street, scanning every shadow, and then he saw him, the silhouette, tall, still, indistinct, standing just beyond the reach of the lampost's glow, watching, again. "You," Tommy breathed. The figure didn't move, didn't flee, didn't even flinch. Then, as if bored by Tommy's realization, the silhouette turned slowly and walked away. No haste, no fear. Tommy started after him, but the moment he rounded the corner, the street was empty. Only the faint rattle of a distant train filled the silence. "Enough," Tommy murmured. "Enough of this." He stood still, thinking hard. The duplicator, the ledger, the cut rope, the SOS, the strand of auburn hair. Tuppence wasn't merely missing. She was being moved from place to place as though someone needed her alive, but hidden. He looked back at the warehouse. It was not a prison. It was a waypoint. Temporary. Transitional. A holding place between destinations. And the watchers, those silent silhouettes haunting every step he took, were not just pursuers. They were escorts, guiding him, nudging him, herding him toward some inevitable conclusion. Tommy Beresford had never been more certain. He slipped the map, the ledger page, and the stencil fragment into his coat. Then he turned from the warehouse and walked into the night, not blindly, not beaten, but with a new, grim clarity. They were moving Tuppence, and now Tommy would begin to move faster. Tommy Beresford reached his flat shortly after 9 o'clock, shoulders tight, mind still echoing with the sound of the SOS tapping that had vanished into silence. The duplicator stencil, the ledger, the map, each clue weighed on him like stacked stones. When he unlocked the door, Inspector Marriott was already there, leaning over the dining table and examining the battered stencil Tommy had retrieved from the warehouse. Marriott did not glance up. "Operation again, code X7, he read aloud, tapping the half-inked stencil. "I haven't seen those words in 20 years. "So, you have seen them," Tommy said, slipping off his coat. "And here I thought I was collecting rare curios." Marriott ignored the remark. Section P had plans, wild, questionable plans, toward the end of the war. Operation Again was one of them. The idea was simple enough. Compromised agents, unstable identities, people who'd been too deeply embedded in enemy circles. Section P wanted to give them new lives, new names, a second chance. Officially, it was shelved. Unofficially, he gestured to the stencil. Someone saved the tools. Tommy paced to the window, restless. "And Blakely?" "Rumoured dead," Marriott said. "Rumoured alive. Rumoured a traitor. Rumoured a patriot. Depends which version of the war you listen to." "Not helpful." "No," Marriott admitted. "But the more troubling part is this." He lifted the ledger page with Tuppence's old alias. Someone kept track of anyone remotely connected to the program, even auxiliary interviewers. Tommy's head snapped up. "Tuppence interviewed someone connected to Operation Again?" Marriott nodded. During her wartime service, she evaluated 2 candidates suspected of being Blakely's double. One had slipped up. Something tiny, a misplaced phrase, a hesitation. Tuppence reported it quietly. The file was buried. Years later, Blakely's name resurfaced in rumours. Someone matching his description operating under a false identity. You see where this is going. Tommy gripped the edge of the table. "If she remembers even a detail, it could expose everything," Marriott finished. "Old sins, old spies, old betrayals." Tommy's thoughts flashed to the message from Chalk Farm. If she remembers, everything collapses. It wasn't poetic, it was literal. He sank into a chair, elbows resting on his knees. "I dismissed the first note," he said quietly. "Tuppence showed it to me, and instead of insisting she stay, I let her walk out the door. I should have insisted. I should have—" "Tommy," Marriott said in a low, steady tone, "you didn't cause any of this." Tommy stared down. "No, but I didn't prevent it either." And before Marriott could respond, a frantic knocking rattled the front door. Tommy shot up. "Jane?" He opened the door, and there she stood, Jane Brown, pale, trembling, scarf askew, eyes enormous with fear. "They put something under my door," she blurted. "Another message, a different one." Tommy ushered her in. Marriott bolted the door behind them. Jane fumbled inside her coat and produced a small scrap of paper. "I didn't open it this time," she said, hands shaking. "I didn't dare." Tommy took it gently, unfolded it, and frowned. The paper was covered in strange shapes, loops, tiny symbols, a cipher. Marriott groaned. "Marvelous. They're playing games." Tommy didn't answer. His mind was already shifting gears. The symbols weren't random, they followed a pattern, one he hadn't seen in years, yet one as familiar as the lines of Tuppence's smile. "Tuppence and I invented this," he murmured. Jane blinked. "Invented?" "For treasure hunts," Tommy said, smiling faintly despite himself. "We used them to hide clues around the village. Looks identical to the ones she'd draw when she wanted to make certain I didn't win too easily." Marriott folded his arms. "Decode it, then." Tommy fetched a pencil, sat at the table and began translating. The cipher's trick lay in reading every third symbol, reversing the order, then substituting letters based on an agreed grid they had drawn on an old envelope long ago. The work was slow but steady. Marriott watched. Jane wrung her hands and the flat felt charged with tension. At last, Tommy put the pencil down. "It says," he read aloud, "he knows, trust no one. Northgate, midnight." Jane gasped. Marriott's eyebrows shot upward. "And that," Tommy said, "sounds very much like a rendezvous." Marriott tugged at his coat. "We'll set up plainclothes officers. No uniforms, no obvious tails." Tommy looked at the message again. "He knows," could refer to Blakely, could refer to the grey-faced man, could even refer to our lamppost friend. "We still don't know his identity," Marriott said grimly. "Only that he's been tracking your movements more closely than I like." Jane swallowed. "Will he be at the North Gate?" "Possibly," Tommy said. "But if he wanted to harm us, he had opportunities. He seems more interested in monitoring." Marriott gave a curt nod. "Surveillance is a language, and someone is speaking it fluently." Another knock, quicker, lighter, broke the moment. Marriott bristled. "Stay back." He approached with hand on the door latch, checked through the peephole, then exhaled sharply. "It's a delivery boy." He opened the door just enough to take a folded note from the boy, who scurried away without waiting for coins. Tommy unfolded it. A torn message, half missing. Only 2 words remained. "My memory." Jane covered her mouth. Marriott swore softly. Tommy felt something cold travel down his spine. "They're pushing a theme," he said. "Memory, identity, secrets." "Or someone is warning us that Tuppence's memory is the target," Marriott countered. "Perhaps the key they keep referencing isn't a person, it's what she remembers." Tommy stood silently for a moment. He remembered the broken teacup, the grey envelope, Tuppence's unreadable flicker as she pocketed the note, the silent phone call the next morning, the cigarette stub in their sitting room, the torn fragment, "Not follow me." He pressed his palms against the table. She knew something was wrong. She felt it. Jane spoke softly. "Mr. Beresford, are you frightened?" Tommy turned toward her. His expression was not fear exactly, something deeper, heavier. "Terrified," he said. "But being terrified never stopped Tuppence. It won't stop me." Marriott straightened. "Tonight then. Northgate. Midnight." Tommy nodded. But inside him, guilt and dread churned. He had ignored the first sign. He had let her go alone. He had been 1 step behind at every turn, and now the game was moving faster. Much faster. As they prepared to leave for the rendezvous, Tommy's thoughts turned again and again to Tuppence, her sharp mind, her laughter, her ability to notice details he overlooked, and he knew with sudden, overwhelming clarity that the shadow following him, the riddles left behind, the duplicator ink, the warehouse, all of it was accelerating toward a confrontation. Someone had resurrected a wartime ghost, someone who feared what Tuppence knew, or what she didn't know she knew. The message lay on the table like a bruise. He knows. Trust no one. Tommy tucked it into his pocket, and as he extinguished the lamps and followed Marriott into the corridor, he understood at last. The search for Tuppence was no longer a pursuit of clues. It was a race against the past itself. Tommy Beresford reached his flat shortly after 9 o'clock, carrying the weight of every clue he had gathered. The memory of the tapping in the warehouse still rang in his ears. 3 quick knocks, 3 slower, repeating like a heartbeat he had failed to answer in time. When he opened the door, Inspector Marriott was already inside, hunched over the dining table, studying the battered duplicator stencil as if it might spring to life and confess its secrets. Marriott didn't look up. "Operation again, Code X7, he read, tapping the half-inked stencil. "I haven't heard those words since the war." "So you have heard them," Tommy said, hanging his coat. "And I thought I'd discovered a forgotten collector's item." Marriott's tone stayed flat. Section P devised several proposals in the war's final years, some reckless, some brilliant, most abandoned. Operation Again was one of the messier ones. The concept was to revive compromised agents under rebuilt identities, people whose loyalties were uncertain, people fractured by deep cover work. "Recycled spies?" Tommy asked. "Reassigned ghosts," Marriott corrected. "The scheme was shut down. Too many disputes, too many accusations, but the tools clearly weren't destroyed." Tommy's eyes moved to the ledger page with Tuppence's wartime alias written in faded pencil. "She once interviewed a candidate, didn't she? Someone they suspected of being Blakely's double." Marriott nodded. "A minor interview at the time, not even formal. But she noticed something, an inconsistency, a hesitation. She flagged it. The report vanished into a drawer. Years later, rumours re-emerged. A man matching Blakely's description seen operating under new identification. Then the sightings evaporated." Tommy exhaled. "And now someone thinks Tuppence remembers something." "Or fears that she might," Marriott said quietly. "Old operations breed old paranoia." Tommy sank into a chair, elbows on the table. "I dismissed the first note she found. She showed it to me and I made a joke. One stupid joke. If I'd insisted she stay—" "Tommy," Marriott interrupted, voice steady but not unkind. "She walked out because she meant to. She always has." "That's hardly a comfort." "And yet," Marriott said, "you'd never have stopped her. You know that." Before Tommy could argue, a sudden, frantic knocking rattled the door. Tommy was on his feet in seconds. He opened it, and Jane Brown nearly fell inside. Her hair was wind-blown, her breath shallow, and fear trembled in every line of her face. "They left another message," she gasped. "Under my door. I didn't open it. I ran." Tommy guided her to a chair. Marriott secured the lock. Jane fumbled in her coat and produced a folded slip of paper. "It's the same kind of envelope the man gave me. I didn't dare touch anything inside." Tommy unfolded the paper cautiously. The page was covered in strange symbols, loops, squares, tiny arrows, a cipher, but not an unfamiliar one. Tommy frowned, recognition creeping across his face. "I know this." "You do?" Jane asked anxiously. "Tuppence and I made these years ago," Tommy said, unable to prevent a small pained smile. "For treasure hunts. She always insisted the clues should require just enough effort to keep me from boasting." Marriott leaned over the table. "Can you decode it?" "With the old method, yes." Tommy fetched a pencil and began. The trick was reading every third mark, reversing sections, and using a substitution grid they'd once drawn on the back of a pub menu. His hand moved faster as familiar patterns emerged. Marriott watched intently. Jane twisted her gloves. Finally, Tommy set the pencil down. "It reads," he said, "He knows. Trust no one. North Gate, midnight." Marriott let out a low whistle. "That sounds like a trap." "A warning, perhaps," Tommy suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Jane hugged her arms around herself. "Does it mean the same man who followed me?" Tommy hesitated. "Possibly, or someone trying to warn us about him." Marriott paced a tight line across the room. "The word he keeps appearing. He knows. Before he does, every clue points to a shadow, but the shadow's shape keeps changing." "That's precisely what troubles me," Tommy murmured. "Blakely? The grey-faced man? The Watcher? Or someone we haven't met yet?" "And yet," Marriott added, "someone clearly wants you at Northgate at midnight. Whether for a warning or an ambush remains to be seen." A light knock at the door made all three of them start. Marriott's jaw tightened. He checked the peephole, then exhaled with restrained irritation. "It's a delivery boy." He cracked the door, took a folded note from the boy and shut it without conversation. Tommy unfolded the new message. This one was torn, jaggedly, as though ripped from someone's hand. Only 2 words remained. "My memory," Marriott swore under his breath. Jane looked ready to cry. Tommy stared at the torn message, the knot in his chest tightening. So it is about memory. But whose? Tuppence's? Blakely's? Someone else entirely? "Someone thinks she remembers something vital," Marriott said, "or fears that she might. Memories can expose lies better than witnesses." Tommy lowered himself into a chair, elbows on his knees. He looked exhausted, not from running, but from carrying invisible weight. "She tried to warn me the night she vanished," he said quietly. "I heard her tone. I saw her eyes flicker, and I dismissed it." Jane reached toward him timidly. "Mr. Beresford, she's strong. Whoever took her hasn't broken her. She signaled you. She sent ciphers. She's fighting." Tommy's throat tightened. "I know." Marriott straightened his coat. "We need to prepare. We'll position plainclothes men around North Gate. No uniforms, no headlights, no sudden moves." "Will they spook whoever's sending these messages?" Jane asked. "Possibly," Marriott admitted, "but going alone would be suicide." Tommy rose, jaw set. "Then we'll go prepared and careful." Jane hesitated. "Should I come?" "No," Tommy said firmly. "You've done more than enough. Someone already marked you as a messenger. We won't risk you further." She nodded shakily. "Then, be careful, please." Tommy watched her leave with protective detail. The flat fell quiet, heavy with unresolved tension. Marriott folded his notes, checked his watch, and sighed. "We should leave soon." Tommy nodded, yet moved slowly, as though anchored. Marriott paused. "Something on your mind?" "Just one thing," Tommy said. "Tuppence and I never invented a cipher without a second layer. A private fallback. Something only we'd ever notice." "Meaning?" "That message might not say only what it appears to. I'll recheck it when we return." Marriott studied him a moment. "You're frightened?" "Of course I'm frightened." Tommy didn't try to hide it. "But fears never stopped Tuppence. It won't stop me now." The clock on the mantel chimed the half-hour. Marriott moved to the door. Tommy lingered 1 second longer, letting his gaze sweep across the room, the cracked teacup on the counter, the half-drawn curtain, the empty chair where Tuppence usually tossed her coat. Small, domestic ghosts, each one cut sharper than any warehouse or cipher. He pocketed the messages, the pencil, and the decoded sheet. Then he extinguished the lamps and followed Marriott into the hallway, footsteps echoing side by side. As they descended the stairs, Tommy realized something with icy clarity. This mystery had stopped being about clues and locations. It was now a race against a truth buried beneath 20 years of secrets, one that someone, somewhere, feared Tuppence remembered, or feared she was about to remember. And whoever he was, the man in the shadows, the ghost from the past, the architect of the revived operation, he already knew they were coming. Tommy squared his shoulders. Midnight awaited. And so did the truth. Tommy Beresford arrived at the north gate of the old Hampstead Cemetery 10 minutes before midnight. It was not a dramatic place, nothing like the fog-shrouded scenes beloved by melodramatic novels. No creeping mist curled over the gravestones, no owl hooted theatrically from a yew tree. Instead, the atmosphere carried the quiet, indifferent sounds of a London night, distant traffic humming along Finchley Road, a soft metallic creak from the rusted cemetery gate, and the occasional whisper of leaves shifting against one another in a light wind. The stillness was unsettling precisely because it felt so ordinary. Tommy stood beneath the arch of blackened ironwork, hands in the pockets of his overcoat, eyes scanning the pathways stretching into darkness. The north gate had once been a grand entrance. Now it slouched with weary disrepair, its hinges drooping like tired shoulders. A single street lamp cast a pale glow onto the gravel, leaving most of the cemetery in shadows. Marriott's plainclothes officers were hidden nearby, 2 in the parked van across the road, 1 behind a mausoleum just inside the fence, others scattered beyond sight. Tommy knew they were there, but the darkness swallowed them so effectively that he might have been standing alone. He checked his watch. 3 minutes to midnight. A thin tension, like taut wire, stretched through his ribs. He tried to steady his breathing. Tuppence would never have let anxiety get the better of her, he thought. She would have filled the silence with some irreverent remark about ghosts charging rent or the deplorable state of London's cemeteries. She would have kept moving, investigating, thinking aloud, following instincts he often failed to see. And he missed her, every spark of her. He reminded himself sharply, she was alive. Price's message, Jane's warning, the SOS tapping, the ledger entries, all pointed not to a corpse but to a captive. Someone moving her, someone needing her. He clung to that hope. Midnight struck. The cemetery seemed to exhale, and then he heard it. Soft footsteps approaching from the far path. Tommy stiffened. A figure emerged slowly into the circle of street lamp light. A man in a long, dark coat, his shoulders hunched, movements uncertain. As he stepped closer, the lamplight revealed a gaunt face, skin greyish, eyes haunted, features drawn tight with fear and exhaustion. The grey-faced man, the same man seen with Tuppence, the same man who had given Jane the empty envelope, the same man the witnesses had described in conflicting patterns. He stopped 3 paces from Tommy. "Mr. Beresford," he whispered, voice trembling. "You came." Tommy's mind sharpened. "Who are you?" The man swallowed. Dudley Price. A shiver of recognition stirred. Marriott had mentioned a minor clerk named Price once connected to Section P, someone unimportant, unremarkable, forgettable. He didn't look forgettable now. "What do you want?" Tommy asked calmly. Price's eyes flicked to the shadows. "We must talk quickly, very quickly." Tommy resisted glancing toward the officers. "I'm listening." Price's breath came out in shallow, frightened bursts. "Your wife is alive." Tommy felt his heart clench with sharp, painful relief. "Where?" I don't know exactly. Not now. They keep moving her, always moving." Price ran a shaking hand across his mouth. "But she is alive, I swear it. I saw her yesterday. He stopped, gripping the gatepost as though steadying himself. "They've done nothing irreversible, not yet." Tommy stepped closer. "Why was she taken? And by whom?" Price looked up, eyes glistening. "Because of Blakely." Tommy felt the air shift. "Blakely is dead." Price shook violently. No, he isn't. Blakely isn't dead." He leaned closer, voice trembling. "He woke the operation again." Tommy's blood chilled. "You mean operation again?" Price nodded, swaying slightly. "He revived it, rebuilt it. He's using the old tools, codes, duplicators, safe houses. He's bringing back the structure, the shadows, the double lives." His voice cracked. "He thinks your wife knows the truth about him." Tommy forced his voice to remain steady. "Why Tuppence?" "Because long ago," Price said, "she interviewed a candidate who claimed to be Blakely's replacement. A double. But she saw through him. She filed a quiet note, a tiny one. Something about his phrasing, something she noticed." His breath hitched. "Blakely believes she remembers the inconsistency. He believes she can expose him." "So he's kidnapped her," Tommy said tightly. "To erase the memory," Price whispered. "Or use it. Some say he wants to rewrite identities again. Others say he wants revenge. I don't know." Tommy studied him. The man's hands were shaking so hard they fluttered against his coat like trapped birds. His face was drenched in sweat despite the cold. "You tried to warn her," Tommy said. "You slipped the note under our door." Price nodded miserably. "I panicked. I didn't know who else to trust. I thought, if she came alone, I could tell her, help her hide, but they got to her first. Then I tried sending messages. I used Jane because I didn't dare approach you myself. I thought they were watching me." "They were watching you," Tommy said quietly. Price flinched. Yes. They're watching everything. Everywhere. I've been followed for days. Hunted." "Tell me where she is now." Price pressed a hand to his temple. I tried to follow them today. They moved her again. But before that, before they spotted me, I heard one of them mention the lines near Finchley. Something about a junction, a north spur. I stole a bit of the map from their table. I have it." Footsteps scraped sharply on gravel. Tommy turned. Price's eyes widened in terror. "Get down!" Tommy shouted. A gunshot cracked through the night. Price jerked violently once, then collapsed into Tommy's arms, dead weight pulling Tommy to his knees. A bloom of red spread quickly across Price's shirt, stark against grey fabric. "Price!" Tommy cried, shaking him, but the man's head lolled loosely, eyes glazed. Dead. Another set of footsteps thundered away into the cemetery darkness. "Marriott!" Tommy shouted. Plainclothes officers burst from hiding. Two sprinted toward the sound of fleeing footsteps. Another knelt beside Tommy. Marriott himself emerged from behind the mausoleum, face ice-hard. "Is he—" Tommy shook his head. Marriott swore viciously. Tommy lowered Price gently to the ground. The dead man's hand twitched, or perhaps a reflex. But as Tommy looked down, he saw Price's fingers curled tightly around something. A scrap of paper. Tommy pried it free, a torn portion of a railway map. The lines were faint, but one junction was still visible, a circled spur leading toward Finchley. Marriott leaned over his shoulder. "Finchley. That narrows it." Tommy stood slowly, fists clenched. "He tried to tell me. They killed him before he could." Marriott nodded grimly. "Professional shot. Silent approach, clean escape. Not an amateur." Tommy looked up into the cemetery's yawning darkness. "He said they're moving her constantly, that she's alive, that Blakely believes she remembers something." "And now we know the direction," Marriott said. "Finchley gives us rail lines, abandoned depots, storage yards." Tommy shook his head, voice low and fierce. "Not enough. He didn't risk his life for nothing. There's meaning in the scrap, a clue about where they last were, or where they're going." Marriott placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tommy, we'll search every inch of Finchley." Tommy looked down at Price's still form. A shudder passed through him. Rage, grief, resolve, all tangled. "He died trying to save her," Tommy said, "even if he fumbled along the way." Marriott nodded. "Fear makes many men clumsy." Tommy inhaled, the cold night air biting deep into his lungs. "Blakely woke the operation again. Then he took Tuppence. He's been watching me, her, everyone, and he thinks he can hide behind old ghosts and dead files." He knelt, pressing Price's hand once in quiet acknowledgement. "But he's wrong." Marriott stepped back. "What are you going to do?" Tommy stood, eyes burning with a rare, steely fire. "Find the junction, find the spur, find the safe house, and bring Tuppence home." His voice carried into the still night with a force that made even the plainclothes officers glance over. Tommy Beresford, gentle-natured, affable, sometimes underestimated, was gone. What remained was the man who had stood beside Tuppence in every battle, every mission, every quiet corner of danger they had shared. He folded the torn map into his pocket. "We go to Finchley," he said. "And this time," he added softly, "I won't be one step behind." Tommy Beresford had always disliked houses that pretended to be empty. They felt dishonest, structures trying a little too hard to seem unimportant, like a guest at a party who insists he doesn't know anyone while quietly listening to every conversation. The house they found in Finchley, tucked between a shuttered grocer's shop and a row of narrow terraces, was precisely that sort of place. It sat behind a neglected hedge, its garden gate sagging on a single hinge, windows darkened with grime. Nothing about it invited attention, nothing suggested life, which, as Marriott pointed out, made it perfect for the sort of clandestine activity Section P specialized in. "Shell company ownership," Marriott muttered, studying the paperwork obtained through discreet channels. "No listed tenants, reinforced basement added 5 years ago. And look at this, 2 electricity meters, one regular, one buried in the back wall." "Hidden sources of power?" Tommy asked. Marriott nodded. "Section P used that trick constantly. This house fits their pattern to the letter." Tommy stared up at the darkened windows. His pulse had been tight since Price's death the night before. Now, standing before this silent structure, the tension became almost suffocating. "She's here," he said quietly. "I can feel it." Marriott's expression softened briefly. "Then let's get her." They approached the front door cautiously. No creaking, no dramatic gust of wind, only the soft crunch of gravel beneath their shoes. Marriott signalled to 2 plainclothes officers who had accompanied them. They flanked the entrance. Tommy tried the doorknob, unlocked. A cold prickle ran down his spine. Inside, the hallway smelled of dust and something sharper beneath it, metallic, chemical, the same thin tang of duplicating ink he had followed for days. The air was stale, as though the house exhaled only when no one was watching. Marriott nodded to the officers, who took the upstairs rooms. He and Tommy moved toward the rear, passing through a narrow kitchen whose windows were papered with brown sheets from the inside. A single mug lay on the counter, clean, dry, unused in days. "Someone lived here recently," Marriott whispered. "Someone disciplined." "Not the chaotic sort," Tommy agreed. "Blakely is methodical." They reached a door near the back, reinforced steel, out of place in an otherwise ordinary house. Marriott tested the handle. Locked. Tommy's heart beat faster. "This leads to the basement." Marriott motioned for one of the officers. Together they forced the door open with a metal bar. A harsh metallic snap echoed through the hallway as the frame gave way. A narrow staircase plunged into darkness. Tommy descended first. The air grew colder with each step, layered with the unmistakable smell of duplicator fluid, the chemical sharpness almost visible in the dimness. A faint electrical hum vibrated from somewhere deeper inside. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting a small pool of pale light over the basement floor. Tommy stopped dead. They had found a room that should not exist in any house outside government hands. A makeshift interrogation chamber, a table with straps, a chair bolted to the floor, a thin chain hanging from a beam overhead, a stack of folders sitting neatly beside a duplicator machine whose drum still glistened with ink. And on the far table, a notebook, open, pages brimming with neatly copied documents. Tommy approached with dread hollowing his chest. The notebook contained Tuppence's old wartime interviews, detailed transcriptions Blakely had reconstructed from memory, from stolen files, from whatever fragments he could gather. Each page bore her name in the corner, T. Beresford, Auxiliary Interview Division. Marriott looked over Tommy's shoulder. "Good Lord," he muttered. "He rebuilt her entire archive." Tommy turned the next page and froze. A sheet was covered in Blakely's handwriting. Tight, aggressive strokes. "She remembers. She must. If she speaks, the whole structure collapses. I cannot allow it." Tommy's fists clenched. "Does she?" Marriott asked quietly. Tommy exhaled. "She might, or she might not. But Blakely believes she does, and that's enough to make him dangerous." Marriott ran a hand along the duplicator machine. "He's been producing messages, notes, instructions." "And warnings," Tommy added darkly. Another page of the notebook listed two names, Agent A and Agent B, with columns comparing habits, phrasing, and minor behavioral tics. Certain lines were underlined repeatedly. "He's trying to work out which of them she identified," Marriott said. "Even though she never did," Tommy murmured. But Blakely's obsession didn't permit uncertainty. In his mind, Tuppence's memory was the key that could expose his false identity, unravel his carefully reconstructed life. Tommy had just closed the notebook when a sound cut through the room. A faint cry, muffled, desperate, human. Tommy froze. Marriott stiffened. "Where?" The cry sounded again, so faint Tommy wondered if he had imagined it. But it was real. A strained, choked sound coming from the back corner. Tommy's heart slammed against his ribs. "Tuppence!" He ran toward the sound, weaving between crates and cables. A locked door stood in the corner, narrow, reinforced, barely noticeable in the bad light. Tommy hammered on it. "Tuppence!" A muffled voice, hoarse but unmistakably her, answered. "Tommy!" His breath broke. He seized the knob, yanking with all his strength. It didn't budge. Marriott arrived with a crowbar. "Stand back." Two officers joined them. Metal groaned. The frame splintered, the lock snapped. The door swung open with a violent crack. And there she was. Tuppence sat on a low chair, wrists tied but posture defiant, chin up in that stubborn tilt he knew better than his own reflection. Her hair was dishevelled, her clothes rumpled, but her eyes blazed with fury and relief and unbroken fire. "Tommy," she breathed, "you slowpoke. What took you so long?" He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him fiercely, trembling just enough for him to feel it. "You're safe," he whispered. "I am now," she murmured into his shoulder. Marriott began untying her ropes. "Mrs. Beresford, did Blakely hurt you?" "Only my patience," she said sharply. "He talked for hours, ranted really. He thinks I remember something I don't. He kept asking which man slipped, the phrase he got wrong. But I never told anyone because I never knew. The real traitor was someone else entirely, someone long gone. Tommy pulled back, studying her face. So he's wrong. Blakely is entirely fueled by being wrong, Tuppence said. It's practically a hobby. Before Tommy could respond, footsteps thundered above them. Marriott jerked upright. He's here. Tuppence's grip tightened on Tommy's arm. He fled when he heard voices earlier. He didn't get far. The footsteps moved down the stairs. Tommy pushed Tuppence behind him instinctively. Blakely appeared at the bottom step. He looked nothing like his faded photograph. His hair had thinned, his face hollowed, yet his eyes burned with manic conviction. He held a pistol loosely by his side, as though he barely remembered it was there. "Mrs. Beresford," he said with chilling calm, "you should not have been found." Marriott raised his weapon. "Blakely, drop the gun." Blakely ignored him, eyes fixed on Tuppence. "You know too much." Tuppence stepped forward before Tommy could stop her. "I know nothing you think I know." "You remember the interview," Blakely hissed. "You remember the slip." "I remember interviewing 2 agents," Tuppence said crisply. "I remember you were not one of them. The real traitor was exposed years ago. He's dead. You've built an entire fantasy on a lie." Blakely's face contorted. "No, you're lying. You're lying to save yourself." "If I were lying," Tuppence snapped, "I'd come up with something cleverer." Blakely's grip on the pistol wavered. Marriott moved. Blakely swung the gun wildly, but Tommy lunged, grabbing his arm. The gun clattered to the floor. One of the officers tackled Blakely from behind, pinning him. Blakely thrashed, snarling like a trapped animal. "Price wasn't lying," he screamed. "More of us are still out there." Marriott wrenched his arms behind him. "Save it for the inquiry." Blakely continued to struggle, but the fight had left him. The years of paranoia, obsession and secrecy sagged in his frame like a collapsing tent. Tommy turned to Tuppence. She exhaled shakily. "Well," she said, brushing dust off her skirt, "that was ghastly." Tommy pulled her close again. "You're safe now." She rested her forehead against his. "You found me." "Always," he said. Marriott interrupted gently. "Let's get you both out of here. We've more to unravel." Tuppence nodded. "Yes. If Blakely's right about anything, it's that he wasn't alone." Tommy took her hand. "Then we start with the map," he said, "and we finish this together." Tuppence insisted on sitting in her favourite armchair, though Tommy thought she ought to be lying down with smelling salts, brandy, or at least a warm blanket. But typical of her, she brushed aside every suggestion with brisk hand waves, claiming that after being trussed up like a Christmas parcel in Finchley, she had no intention of spending another moment feeling managed. Her auburn hair, though tangled from the ordeal, still retained that faintly defiant curl, and her chin, always the first part of her to resume fighting form, was lifted at an angle that told Tommy she was more herself again. The little sitting room felt unusually quiet. Perhaps it was the knowledge of how close they had come to never seeing it again, or perhaps it was simply the effect of returning from the labyrinth of danger into a space where the familiar tick of the mantel clock now sounded astonishingly precious. Marriott had left an hour earlier with Blakely in custody, though not without warning them, in that infuriatingly calm tone of his, that there may be bits still to sweep up. Jane Brown had been escorted home with assurances of protection, and the watchers, the broken remnants of whatever Blakely had reawakened, were being rounded up one by one. But now, at last, it was only the 2 of them. Tommy poured tea. His hand shook once, just once, and he covered it with a cough, convinced Tuppence hadn't noticed. She had. Her eyes softened, though she said nothing. Instead, she waited until he'd settled opposite her before she spoke, not dramatically, not even urgently, but with the quiet determination of someone finally ready to explain everything. "I suppose," she began slowly, "that the whole thing comes down to a memory I never actually had." Tommy blinked. "But they believed you did." "Oh yes," she said, warming her hands around the teacup. "Blakely believed it absolutely, and when a man like that believes something, he doesn't trouble himself with proof." He leaned forward. "Start from the beginning. What actually happened during that interview you mentioned?" Tuppence considered. The firelight gave a faint glow to her features, softening the exhaustion but not the intelligence in her eyes. "It was during the last months of the war," she said quietly. "London was half rubble, half paperwork. Section P was trying to replace compromised agents or bring back those who'd disappeared under questionable circumstances. They recruited quietly, always quietly. People came to me for interviews, and I was expected to spot inconsistencies, badly fabricated backstories, those sorts of things. Tommy nodded. You were good at it. She offered him a small smile. I was adequate. On one particular day, 3 candidates came through. One of them was Blakely, or the man who claimed that name. Another was a nervous, sandy-haired fellow who could barely tie a shoelace without trembling. And the third, she paused. The third made a mistake. Not Blakely. Not Blakely. Tommy frowned. Then who was he? A nobody, she replied. A man who wasn't accepted anyway. He told me a detail that contradicted his supposed training, and when I pointed it out, he blushed, apologized, and said he must have been confused. I didn't think much of it. I was dealing with dozens of interviews a week. You don't write down every harmless slip. But Blakely thought you did, Tommy murmured. Yes, she said. And he convinced himself that if I had written anything at all, it must have incriminated him. Tommy set down his teacup with a quiet thud. All this, he said slowly, because you didn't remember something that didn't happen. Tuppence's mouth twitched. Exactly. A shaky laugh escaped him. It wasn't amusement. It was the sort of laughter that escaped when the mind failed to find any other release. Well, he said, that's thoroughly ridiculous. And thoroughly dangerous, Tuppence replied. Blakely spent years hiding behind one identity after another. The war ending didn't stop him. It just left him without a cause. When he learned Section P was being formally dismantled, he panicked. He thought his past would finally catch up with him, and the only loose thread he could imagine was me. Tommy rubbed a hand over his face, which explains why he dragged you off, tried to terrify you, moved you from place to place. Oh, he tried more than terrify, Tuppence said, with an edge Tommy hadn't heard since their early adventures. He tried persuasion first, promising I'd be safe if I handed over the file. Then he tried threats. Then he tried silence, locking me in that awful basement and waiting to see if fear would make anything surface. But I couldn't tell him what didn't exist. Tommy reached across the small table and clasped her hand. She held it tightly, as though the physical contact anchored her. For a moment, neither spoke. "Why did you go?" Tommy asked softly at last. "The note, the one slipped under the door. Why follow it? If you'd woken me, if you'd told me—" "I know," Tuppence murmured. "I know I should have. But the note was odd and intriguing, and I'd been working on that article about early war intelligence groups. I thought it might be something harmless, something interesting, something worth a look." She sighed. "I didn't imagine it would lead back to that old ghost of Section P." Tommy squeezed her hand. "You should have told me. And you," she said pointedly, "should have taken that note seriously instead of muttering something about Albert and practical jokes." Tommy coloured. "I admit," he said stiffly, "that was not my most shining hour. But in my defence, you find trouble even when standing still." She smiled. "And you follow me into it with admirable panic." He snorted, but the tension eased between them, replaced by their familiar, affectionate sparring. Still, underneath the levity, the magnitude of what had happened rested heavily in the room. They spent the next half hour going over the loose ends piece by piece. Jane Brown was safe. Marriott's men had seen to that. The mysterious foreign cigarettes were traced to Blakely's accomplice, a man with a fondness for harsh Balkan tobacco. The watchers at the underground belonged to a forgotten cell of former Section P operatives, all of whom Blakely had bullied or manipulated into participating. They were frightened men, clinging to a leader who offered them a purpose they no longer had after the war. "And the SOS tapping," Tommy said. "That was you." Tuppence grimaced. "I tried it whenever I heard movement upstairs. Thought someone, anyone, might pick it up. But Blakely moved me long before you arrived. He always seemed 2 steps ahead." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Not anymore." "No," she agreed, "not anymore." Silence drifted between them. The sort of silence not born of discomfort, but of shared ordeal. Tommy felt a weight he hadn't permitted himself to acknowledge, a fear he'd kept buried under action. It rose now, unbidden. "I thought I'd lost you," he said quietly. Tuppence reached out, touched his cheek with the gentlest brush of her fingers. "But you didn't." "I might have. But you didn't." He exhaled, shaky and uneven. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched. For a moment, the noise of the world, police reports, Blakely's threats, the echo of underground footsteps, faded completely. When Tuppence finally pulled back, she spoke with deliberate lightness. "Well," she said, "now that we've been kidnapped, chased, spied on and shot at, I suppose we deserve a holiday." "A holiday?" Tommy echoed. "After all that?" "Especially after all that," she said. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere without basements, duplicators or deranged ex-agents. Perhaps a seaside cottage, with scones." Tommy laughed. "You'd still find trouble." "Yes," she conceded, "but at least the trouble would come with a sea view." He stood, stretched and offered her his hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you to bed. You've had a long day." She smirked. "I've had several." As they moved toward the hallway, Tommy paused, turned back and looked at the little room. The teacups, the soft glow of the lamp, the half-open curtains. It seemed incredible that danger had hovered so close to this space, that Tuppence had vanished from it, that he had walked through London unsure he would ever see it, or her, again. Tuppence squeezed his hand. "We're all right," she said softly. "Yes," he replied, "we are." And indeed they were. For the moment, that was everything. Tommy Beresford approached the kitchen counter with the solemn concentration of a man defusing a bomb. He held the teapot in both hands, tilted it with meticulous precision, and poured steaming amber liquid into Tuppence's cup without spilling a drop or, most crucially, touching anything that could crack. He set the pot down as gently as if it were a newborn child. Behind him, curled comfortably on the sofa with a blanket over her knees, Tuppence watched the entire performance over the top of the morning paper. Her eyebrows lifted with exaggerated admiration. My, she murmured. "The nation sleeps soundly tonight, knowing you have mastered the art of pouring tea without structural damage." Tommy sniffed. "One broken cup does not define a man." "That cup was my favourite." "And you have scores of favourites," he replied. "It's a wonder any of them survive daily life with you." She lowered the paper enough to reveal a smirk. "Touché." The kitchen was filled with homely, comforting sound. The click of the gas hob, the pop of bread rising from the toaster, the rustle of newspaper pages. Outside, the world carried on with perfectly ordinary Wednesday morning behaviour. Milk vans rattling down the street, sparrows bickering at the windowsill, postmen clattering letters through brass slots. After the labyrinths of fear and secrecy they had navigated, the simple rhythm of domestic noise seemed almost miraculous. Tuppence folded the newspaper neatly and tapped a headline with one finger. "Well, here it is," she declared. "Suppressed wartime scandal. Intelligence ghost finally apprehended." Beneath the bold title, a smaller line read, "Inspector Marriott leads successful recovery of lost case file." Tommy set down the plate of toast. "Leeds?" he echoed. "He arrived at the end." Tuppence adopted an expression of deep sympathy. "My dear, the police always arrive at the end. It's practically a policy." "I'm not even mentioned," Tommy muttered, buttering the toast with a hint of indignation. "That's because Marriott intends to keep us out of the official story," Tuppence said. "He told me privately that anyone foolish enough to poke their noses into revived wartime operations deserves anonymity for their own safety." Tommy paused. "Are we foolish?" "Frequently," she replied sweetly. He handed her a slice of toast. She accepted it one-handed, the other holding the blanket tight around her shoulders. Despite her calm manner, Tommy caught the faint signs of what lay beneath. A tremor when she reached for her tea, a flicker of fatigue behind her eyes. She was healing, yes, but the ordeal had carved its mark. Trying to keep things light, he nodded at the newspaper. "And what's this talk of a scandal? Marriott hasn't exaggerated, has he?" "Oh no," Tuppence said, reading aloud. "The revived conspiracy, believed to have originated from a post-war cell misled by false intelligence, has been classified and sealed." She lowered the paper. "He's made Blakely sound like an overzealous clerk who simply misplaced his marbles." Tommy spread marmalade onto his toast. "That may be kinder than the truth." "Perhaps." She gazed thoughtfully at the paper. "But stories change depending on who tells them, and whose motives are involved." He looked at her more closely. "Are you thinking of writing about it?" She brightened. "Absolutely. It screams for a novel. A daring heroine, a shadowy villain, mysterious notes, abandoned warehouses. It practically writes itself." Tommy groaned. Please use a pseudonym. The world is not prepared for Tuppence Beresford, action novelist. I'll have you know I would be marvellous, and I might even name a villain after you for failing to appreciate my artistic instincts. I think you've already named several villains after me, in arguments. That's different, she said airily. That's sport. Tommy rolled his eyes, but the banter, sharp, familiar, warm, lifted something heavy from his chest. For the first time since she had vanished, he felt the world settling back into its proper shape. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes. Tuppence reached for the jam, and Tommy automatically steadied the plate. She didn't comment, but her smile said everything. At last, Tuppence set down her teacup and exhaled softly. There is one thing I can't quite let go. Tommy looked up. What's that? Price, she said. Why he did it. Why he tried to help me at all. He wasn't brave, he wasn't noble, he was terrified. Tommy nodded slowly. He had thought the same. He said he wasn't a hero. And he wasn't, Tuppence agreed, but people rarely act out of heroism. More often they act out of guilt. Her voice gentled. Something he'd done in the past, something tied to Blakely, must have weighed on him badly. Warning me was his way of paying a debt he couldn't name aloud. Tommy was quiet for a moment. He died trying to make it right. Yes, she said softly. He did. Tommy pushed aside the last crumbs of toast and reached into his jacket pocket. He drew out a tiny scrap of paper, the torn corner of the note Tuppence had dropped in the underground. The faint words, "Not follow me," were still visible. He turned it over once, then closed his fist around it. "You're keeping that?" she asked gently. He met her eyes. As a reminder. Of what? How close things came. Tuppence reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Close, she said, but not over. No, Tommy murmured, not over. She squeezed his hand. We're still here, and we always will be, as long as we keep our wits, our courage, and occasionally our sense of humour. And tea, Tommy added. And toast, she said, and no more cracked cups. That, Tuppence declared, I cannot promise. Life with me is rarely tidy. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with fond exasperation. Wouldn't have it any other way. Tuppence picked up the newspaper again. Well, she said, our latest adventure has officially concluded. Do you suppose the next one will give us at least a fortnight's rest before erupting? Tommy laughed. Knowing us? Not a chance. She folded the paper, set it beside her, and tucked her feet further under the blanket. Whatever comes, she said lightly, we'll face it the way we always do. Side by side, Tommy said. Exactly. The mantel clock chimed the hour. The toast cooled, the tea grew warm and fragrant, and in the small, sunlit kitchen of their modest London flat, Tommy and Tuppence Beresford settled into a moment of peace, ordinary, fragile, and beautifully theirs.